All right, well, we'll give it a couple seconds to have people get on and ready to join the webinar. All right, I think I'll go ahead. We're at the top of the hour. Welcome to Recycle in America, about polypropylene and building a better system. I'm Kate Davenport. I'm our Chief Impact Officer here at the Recycling Partnership. So we're going to be digging into polypropylene. This is part of our Recycling in America webinar series. And polypropylene is an extremely common packaging, but is pretty under recycled at this point. So we have some awesome experts here to join us today to dig into the details. So to go into a little bit of kind of logistics, if you want to go to the next, are the slides showing? Sorry for the technical ask. Okay. So we'll talk a little bit about how we got here with polypropylene, and then we'll jump to some expert speakers on kind of understanding their perspectives from different points in the system. And so if we can jump to the slide introducing everyone, that would be great. So I introduced myself. I'm Kate Davenport, our Chief Impact Officer here at the Recycling Partnership. We're a nonprofit that's invested in making recycling work in the United States and engaged with many folks across the system to make that happen. We have Robert Flores here from Amcor, who helps make some of the packaging that we use every day. Nicole Jansen from Denton Plastic that helps take some of that old plastic that gets into the recycling stream and turn it into recycled content. And then Bryce Stalkup from Scott County in Iowa, who's on the front line of collecting material and sorting it at the front end of the system. So people at different points in the chain here today to help us understand what is working, what isn't working, and where we need to kind of innovate and continue to invest. Behind the scenes, if we can go to the next slide, here's our team of folks to help with the chat and Q&A support. So we have Brittany LaValle, our Vice President of Material Systems, Karen Bandauer, sorry, Karen, our Senior Strategic Advisor, Eric DeRoberts, Director of Material Systems, and Dylan DeThomas, our Vice President of Public Policy and Government Affairs. So if you have official questions, you can use the Q&A, and our subject matter experts will help get back you on those questions. Also, if you have kind of immediate questions for the panelists, you can use the chat function. Please, we ask that you be respectful in the chat. We're up for debate, but please be respectful in that debate. So we will have the folks that I just introduced monitoring the Q&A and the chat throughout the next hour. So let's jump in, and I'll give a little, we're going to do a poll. Sorry. And I think, Elise or Whitney, are you going to explain the poll? Okay, here's the poll. So how familiar are you with polypropylene recycling? We'll give people a few more minutes on that. Thanks for everyone getting on and telling us who you are and where you're from. It's got folks from all over the country. This is awesome. So I think maybe we can move on from the poll. I'm asking my technical help. Okay, here we go. Here are the results. So we have people, it looks like we have good representation from a lot of the people that in terms of companies that supply or manufacture polypropylene, or folks that work in a recycling program that recycles. and then some folks that want to understand it more and don't know much. So we'll try to address all of those kind of different perspectives. We want to go to the next slide here. So just a little bit about the Recycling Partnership. As I mentioned, our mission is to build a better U.S. recycling system. We're a purpose-driven NGO. We have a team of experts, practitioners, and thought leaders that work to overhaul the U.S. recycling system through on-the-ground action. Been around for 11 years. And our perspective is that the U.S. recycling system really needs all of us. We need folks on the business side. We need communities and recycling facilities. We need policy and policy makers and industry and NGO partners. It's a very complicated system. It touches all of our lives. If you think about the cart that many of us put out every day, it touches many businesses with the packaging that they manufacture. So it really takes all of us to figure out how to improve and scale the U.S. recycling system. I want to go to the, all right. So we at the Recycling Partnership really think about the recycling system in terms of its 5 core elements. So we need to design packaging up front for recycling so that it can work in the system. If we have a bunch of packaging that can't be recycled, then we need to solve that on the front end. We need people to be able to recycle. We need all households to have the ability to put their packaging into a cart and it can go into the system. So people have to be able to recycle. We need to incentivize and engage the public to actually put recycling in that cart on a regular basis. So we need public participation and education and outreach and engagement. And then we need the infrastructure for it to go into. So we need material recovery facilities that sort that material. We need trucks to pick it up, et cetera. So we need that infrastructure for people to have access, for it to be collected and sorted. And then we need old stuff to turn into new stuff. So recycling facilities that sort the material need those supply chains and those end markets that take it and turn it into new stuff. We need that demand for recycled content, for example, to go into new products for the whole circle to work. So all of those things need to be true and work together for the U.S. recycling system to really work. So let's talk a little bit about building a better system for materials and polypropylene. Just a little bit of a kind of review and context. About 20 years ago, 25 years ago, we started to see plastic packaging being added to residential recycling programs. It was primarily water bottles, laundry detergent bottles, and milk jugs. And then about 10 or 15 years ago, we started to see recycling programs across the country add more plastics. A lot of times we saw that described as all plastics 3 through 7, 3 through 7 being the numbers that you see on the bottom of packaging. And then in 2013, 2014, we saw what was called green fence. So a lot of that additional new types of packaging in that 3 through 7 category were being exported overseas. And what was happening was that they were pulling out the good stuff and not necessarily recycling the big stuff. And a lot of that was going to China. So we saw green fence, and then we saw national sword in 2018. And so this was Asian markets, particularly China, pushing back on getting those 3 through 7 bales. And what that revealed was that we really needed to understand when we accept material in a residential recycling program, where it's going and what it's getting turned into. And that the primary material within that 3 through 7 bale that had value that markets wanted was polypropylene. And so at that point in time, it was recognized that we needed to build up the infrastructure for material recovery facilities in the recycling system, the folks that get the material in the cart, to be able to sort polypropylene as its own type of material. And we needed to develop the markets for that. And so the Recycling Partnership and many others were very involved in investing in material recovery facilities to be able to sort polypropylene specifically, and in the end markets to be able to take that to turn it into new product. And it's been a pretty remarkable last 10 years, really started by the pushback from China and the revealing that not all 337s were getting recycled, a recognition that we needed to develop the supply chain in the United States for polypropylene, and pretty significant investment in the infrastructure to scale that. And so now here we are 10 years later. We have enabled a lot of the infrastructure in the United States at the material recovery facility level to be able to accept polypropylene, but now we need to kind of go to the next step. So if you can go to the next slide. So we know that there's nearly 2 billion pounds of polypropylene that's generated each year. It is now the most common rigid plastic packaging in the United States. And we'll get Rob Flores to talk a little bit more about that. But only 20% of polypropylene packaging is captured in household recycling. And we've invested a lot in having material recovery facilities in communities across the country to be able to accept polypropylene, but now we need to make sure that that packaging is on the accepted list, that residents are educated that it is accepted so that they know to put it in their cart. So we at the Recycling Partnership are doing a lot of work right now on saying, how do we make sure residents know they can recycle this packaging? It does get sorted, it does get turned in to new product so that we're stimulating that supply into the cart. I think we also have so I just spoke to that polypropylene requires strong education and outreach to achieve those high recycling rates. So one thing we've also seen in the last 5 years is that we've had policy pass in 7 states in the United States, what's called extended producer responsibility. And that's a mechanism to engage the folks that use packaging for their products to pay into the infrastructure needed for that material to get recycled. And so this is a really exciting moment for US recycling, and that we now have a policy mechanism that really stimulates investment in the supply side of the system. And so we have 1 in 5 Americans now live in a state where EPR has been passed. We know with polypropylene that in many of those states, the infrastructure is there to sort it and get it to end market, but we need to really educate and stimulate residents to put that material in the cart. Because if we don't, I think you can go to the next points on the slide, we won't achieve the recycling rates that are mandated in some of this extended producer responsibility. So we know that one of the biggest needs in the system is getting that material into the stream. That infrastructure there is there to accept that and turn it into old material. It will continue to need investment, but we really need to, we're really focused here on how do we educate and engage people to put the polypropylene packaging in the cart. So with that, let's jump into the Q&A. I think I've probably been talking enough. So if we can bring our panelists on. All right, so thank you all for joining us today to talk about polypropylene. I'm excited to dig in here. So maybe we'll start with Rob, if each of you can introduce yourselves and say, kind of, where are you in the supply chain? What do you do with polypropylene? Why do you care about polypropylene packaging and polypropylene recycling? Robert, I'll start with you.
Hi, Rob Flores with Amcor, and we're a converter. So we take plastic resin and convert it into packaging, and we're one of the largest, if not the largest, producers of polypropylene packaging.
Nicole, do you want to go? I'm going this way.
Absolutely. Thank you again for letting me talk on this subject, by the way. I'm Nicole Jansen from Denton Plastics in Portland, Oregon. I'm a reclaimer out here in Portland, and polypropylene is one of the main types of material that we process here. I'm also currently serving on the APR board, Resource Recycling Board, and I am very active in the legislation that was just passed in Oregon. I was on the steering committee for a few years, and then currently am a member of the ORSAC committee that helps the rollout of EPR.
Awesome. And Bryce?
Hi, everyone. My name is Bryce Stalkup. I'm the director of the Waste Commission of Scott County. We operate multiple waste and recycling facilities here in Iowa. The one that we're here to talk about today is our single stream recycling facility, which has grown pretty quickly over the last 10 years. And we recently have made, I would say in 2019, we made a pretty large investment in capturing the polypropylene that we're after.
Awesome. Well, I'll start with a question to all of you, but so polypropylene is now the most common non-bottle rigid packaging. It's surpassing high density polyethylene. And just for context, what is high density polyethylene for those of on the webinar that don't live this every day? High density polyethylene is your laundry detergent bottles, and your milk jugs are typically high density polyethylene in the packaging space. So we now have more polypropylene packaging than we do high density polyethylene packaging. Rob, can you tell us a little bit about, you guys make some of this stuff? Like, give us some examples of what is this? If I'm going to the grocery store, what is polypropylene packaging in my grocery cart?
Yeah, so essentially the vast majority of dairy containers, so whether your yogurt, your Cool Whip, your cottage cheese, sour cream, polypropylene is the dominant resin in dairy packaging. Also, so one, those are very near and dear to my heart. Also near and dear to my heart are drink cups. Obviously there's paper drink cups. We still see, depending on where you live, foam or PET, but a lot of the polypropylene stream is drink cups, which are a very valuable portion of the stream because a lot of those are clear. A lot of the takeout containers are going to polypropylene. Prescription vials, the vast majority of prescription vials are polypropylene. A lot of your frozen meal trays. Most buckets are high density polyethylene, but most kitty litter buckets specifically are polypropylene. So I don't know why that is. I have some theories, but that's kind of an interesting nuance. A lot of your jars are polypropylene. And we think about, like, say, your bottles, most of those bottle caps and closures, some of those are polyethylene, but a lot of those are polypropylene. Polypropylene's a very dominant resin. And then even a lot of the coffee pods used to be polystyrene and have been moving to polypropylene. So it's used in a lot of applications, a lot of food packaging, especially.
A lot of food packaging applications. So Bryce, I'm going to ask you kind of two questions. You guys are at the front end of this, right? You're getting the material that residents are putting in their cart. How do you think about polypropylene as it runs through a material recovery facility?
That's definitely changed over time. But, if I think back 10 years, we were probably like most recyclers out there and we're like, bring it all. We'll figure it out. We'll take it for you because that's what you needed to say as a recycler. And we realized within that 10-year frame, we just need to be real because that's what people want. They want to know, what can I recycle? Not everything is recyclable. So we followed the whole, we went through what everyone else did, where we took 3s through 7s and said, yep, we'll be able to sell it to China. And then we went to more of a tubs and lids pack, which essentially, as we've grown now, it's what it looks like from the outside when you look at a bale. But we installed some, rather than using hand sorting, which we did for years, we installed some optical sorters along with the recycling partnership, with help from the recycling partnership. And I'll never forget the first day we turned those optical sorters on, we noticed really quickly that there is a ton of polypropylene, and it goes well beyond what we could handle, and what buyers even wanted to buy. So what it's morphed into since 2019 when we installed that is really trying to focus on the specific polypropylene that Robert mentioned that buyers actually want to buy to put back into a product again. So quality has gotten better, and we are targeting what is recyclable, and that's what we educate the 25 plus counties that we serve.
So unlike PET #1 bottle, which is primarily bottles and food packaging, or milk jugs or laundry detergent bottles, polypropylene touches a lot of different types of packaging. And I'm sure we'll get into this later, but it means it can be really challenging to figure out, how do you educate residents on the right stuff to put in and the stuff to not put in? And Bryce, you're saying when you installed optical sorters, which is a technology that can tell it that it's a #5 polypropylene resin, there's a lot of packaging that falls into that category. And so Nicole, you're who Bryce might sell a bale to. You guys are probably geographically a little too far apart, but in theory, you're buying bales from MRFs that are sorting polypropylene. Can you tell us a little bit about how you think about this packaging and what you guys do with it?
Absolutely. So we're a little different geographically than some people that have been working with polypropylene for a while. In the Pacific Northwest, not a lot of people were doing polypropylene bales until fairly recently. We, as the legislation changed, decided to install a wash line out here. And in addition to the wash line, most recently, thanks to the Recycling Partnership, we are going to be also installing a flake sorter on the end. All of the steps that we've been making is because the polypropylene bale that you get from a MRF is so different than a PET or a polyethylene #2 bale. There's so many different melts within the bale. For example, you can have a lot of low melts in polyethylene HD, very similar properties, but polypropylene, it can be a fractional melt up to a 50, 60 melt. So where we find we try to tackle these bales is we do custom blends, and we have to test everything that comes through the system. So we had to create this wash line with the flake sorter to really help us determine what's coming in the bale. So that's where we end up on the food chain when we go into making pellets, is really having to determine what's in the bale, what are the properties, and then deciding what our blends are based upon that.
So because it's so many different types of packaging with melt rates, etc., you've got to put in a lot of equipment, and I'm sure operational costs to kind of further sort that out from what Bryce is able to sort out at the MRF, correct?
Absolutely. So, and then besides the material having a lot of different properties, the other huge issue is polypropylene, because it is so different and it doesn't look all the same. Like, it's not just bottles with necks. It's not just soda bottles or milk jugs. You get so many different looking types of packaging. And for years, we've had a lot of people doing the wishful recycling, thinking, oh, it says #5, but it's actually not supposed to go in the residential cart. So the other thing that we've had to deal with is contamination rates. And they're a lot higher for polypropylene than any other bale we've received.
And what's the kind of contamination that you get in the bale? Like, when you say contamination, what do you mean?
So contamination, besides what you would think contamination might be, which is, dirt, metal, we will see aluminum cans. And typically people from MRFs don't want aluminum cans in there. We'll see PET, sometimes the colored PET gets through because people change, brands can change what their packaging is. And what may have been a polyethylene or polypropylene before becomes PET with different decisions. And so we can see PET in there. And what's funny with polypropylene that we've really discovered recently is a lot of labels coming off and film still in the bales.
So I have a few more questions there, but I want to go to something. Nicole, how do you think about, and Rob, this is to you as well, food grade versus non-food grade? Like, Nicole, are you taking just food grade packaging? Are you taking all of it? Like, how do you all, Bryce, question to you too. How do you think about food grade versus non-food grade packaging? And why am I even asking that question?
Yeah. Now, and well, I will tell you that here in the Pacific Northwest, we don't do polypropylene by food grade. I know years ago, mainly polypropylene was tubs and lids. They decided to do a bale that way, which does make sense for food grade because, that's food packaging. But because polypropylene is so different, we would never get the amount of supply that we want if we only accepted food grade. And so we don't have the demand in our area geographically for food grade, so that's not something we do. I know some other locations do have that, but we don't see the bales of just food grade anymore.
Rob, is there anything you would add to that? Yeah, so as mentioned earlier, polypropylene is used in a wide variety of applications, even getting into automotive, crates, etc. So while I'm quite frankly focused more on the food grade, and I think more about that, I think the most critical thing as we're thinking about, is it food grade or non-food grade, is to make a food grade recycled polypropylene, you need to start off with food grade items. That's one of the FDA's requirements. And so when we think about the history and evolution of plastics recycling, it really started with bottles, where you have just so many clear PET bottles and they're all for beverages. There are a few bottles for PET that are non-food, and then like milk jugs, those are all milk food. So with polypropylene, it's been more difficult to get to that mechanical recycling food grade. And so that's really the journey we've been on, is getting enough volume to justify doing that further sorting.
So Bryce, you were saying before you installed the optical sorter, you probably weren't even capturing some of the polypropylene because you didn't even know it was polypropylene. But you're not sorting food grade versus non-food grade, I would guess.
Well, so initially, you would train people that would stand on a line to sort specific things. So you would have to be pretty dang specific when they're standing in a line picking 50, 60 items per minute. Tough job. So we had to be specific. So we knew there was more there, but did our buyers want it? And at the time, there weren't a lot of buyers. Polypropylene, I'm talking 5 to 10 years ago, which was worth nothing. We were basically giving it away. Now, after installing our optical sorter and we turned it on, and everything under the sun that we didn't know was polypropylene, even mixed plastics, with multiple different commodities with it, would be sorted off. We had to focus, and with the specific optical sorters that we have, we are able to focus more on that food grade. And what we see is we're a residential application, so 90% of what we get are from people, and it's food containers. They do throw other things in as well. But we did have to focus our optical sortation on looking at, as much as we could, it's not perfect, but as much as we could, with finding the items that Robert was talking about, dairy containers, drink cups, because that's what the buyers wanted. At the end of the day, we have to be able to sell it. We're okay with giving some stuff away, but we also have to be able to pay the bills at the end of the day too. So
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point. And I think some people know this, but I used to operate a MRF before I was at the recycling partnership. And 10 years ago, there were really hardly any markets for polypropylene or that tubs and lids grade, Nicole, that you were mentioning. We've really seen the expansion of markets for polypropylene coming out of MRFs over the last 10 years. It's actually a pretty remarkable story of a supply chain developing. And Nicole, you're one of those markets that then, if those markets exist, then that helps incentivize the MRFs to sort it, right? Because at the end of the day, Bryce, you need somewhere to sell that material, and it needs to pay you a price that helps cover the cost of your optical sorter and your sorters, et cetera. That's a supply chain that's needed. We, 5-10 years ago, saw markets kind of in the center of the country. Nicole, you're one of those markets on the West Coast that's helping, show that there is a destination for polypropylene if it's collected in Oregon or California, for example, because that is because of Green Fence and National Sword. I think a lot of folks in the US lost trust that there was actually a place for this material to go. And I think part of the story is we are seeing those markets develop in the United States, where Bryce, you can collect polypropylene and it can go to a market in the United States. We have seen that grow over the last 10 years. So that being said, I'd love to hear from each of you. What do you think is the biggest challenge right now around polypropylene recycling in the United States? And you have to pick one. You can't say 5. I'll start with Bryce.
I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing. What do I think is the biggest challenge? Okay. The communication between what buyers need and what we can actually do as the recycler, like bringing those things together. So there is communication that is there, but I think it could be stronger when manufacturers make products compared to what we actually see when it comes to our recycling facility. And then we make this magic happen and get you the clean product. And I think, every step in the chain has its own magic that happens, but really bringing the understanding together from all those parts so we can, as recyclers, focus on what you really want to make new products. I think that's the biggest challenge. Everyone's busy in their day-to-day operations in multiple facilities, and I think that is something that we can improve on.
All right, Nicole, I'm going to go to you.
So Bryce, we are on the same wavelength. Communication between MRFs and our company is one of the key components for all the issues we're seeing. Right now, we have good relationships, but what I find is when I buy material, if they are hand sorting, that's one thing. If they have opticals, that's another item that typically will help with the sorting part of polypropylene. But we have real-time feedback that we give to our MRFs. So when we go through a wash line, we can see how much contamination we have. We keep the contamination to take pictures and document it. But a lot of times, even with that key communication piece there, change doesn't happen. And so with our new, this is something we're actually trying to work on right now that EPR is rolled out in Oregon, is we can't really rely on a bale sort that might be 2 years in the making because so much changes in packaging when you're establishing these laws. I think we need to be in real time and people giving feedback within a short period of time back to our MRFs. So that communication piece is key, and I don't think it's always been there.
So Nicole, you're talking about the quality of the bale feedback to the MRF so they can begin to understand where do I make investments to improve that quality, et cetera. And just to needle on that for a second, Nicole, how do you see EPR incentivizing that?
Well, like I said, we're still kind of going through the rolling implementation right now, but I know that we do have contamination fees that are going to be happening in Oregon based on the quality of the bales. And but it only goes so far. And so I'm trying to work on getting our step also being able to have some kind of feedback in that food chain, because without that, like I said, the bale count that most people do, they break a bale and they look through it and they count and they figure out how much of each material is within the bale. That takes too long. And so I think we really need to make sure we have a quicker turnaround time for that feedback.
To be able to give that feedback directly to the specific customer. Because Nicole, this is probably obvious to you, but just for the audience, the more contamination is in the bale, the more cost to you to clean that up, or you lose yield, which impacts your economics. And recycling is a low margin business. So, you don't want non-polypropylene stuff in that bale because then you got to pay to get it out to get the good product that you need to sell to your customer.
Yeah, and yield, like you just mentioned, is really important. It's a very hot topic of conversation right now. And because the issue is people are going to, if they don't have support, the end markets don't have support in this, and they have contamination, which can be that we've seen bales up to 40% contamination with polypropylene. And if we have to be the ones disposing of it, we don't get fees, we don't get tipping fees like MRFs do. We are the ones that typically are purchasing the bales, so we need support as an end market as well.
Right, so that's been a lot of discussion within Oregon and its extended producer responsibility scheme. It's coming up in other states that have passed EPR. Just as a reminder to everybody, we now have all 3 states on the West Coast that have passed EPR. They're at different stages of implementation, but Oregon, California, and Washington State. Is how do we incentivize the MRFs to create a good quality bale, right? Because we need the end markets to have as much of the material that they want so that they have high yield. And in Oregon and California, there are actually yield requirements within the laws. And that all goes back to, I think, and Rob, Nicole, Bryce, you can jump in here. When National Sword happened in 2018, it really pulled the curtain back and said, hey, we're collecting material and sending it overseas, and we don't really even know if it is getting recycled. So there was public pressure and then legislative pressure to say, we as a society want to know when we put something in that cart that it's actually getting turned into new product. We're trying to incentivize in the system, and that's why EPR is really powerful. So on that question, Nicole, we can come back to some of the details on that in a second, but I want to go to you, Bryce, and say, what incentivizes you to make a good quality bale for Nicole? How do you think about that in terms of your costs, right? So can you speak to that a little bit?
I'm sure there's others on this call, like the Waste Commission of Scott County. We're a public entity. We do not receive tax dollars, so I have to operate as a private, just like a private would. So at the end of the day, we have a mission to keep material out of our landfill, but it has to make economic sense. So that's what keeps us driving forward. We just believe it's the right thing to do, recycle what we as much as we absolutely can. But at the end of the day, if it costs way too much, we won't be able to. So if I, as a recycling facility, can find product that we have. I mean, it's at every recycling facility. You just have to spend some time focusing on what you're looking for the specific polypropylene. There's value there now. And we talked about 5-10 years ago where we were giving this bales away. You can get paid for it now. Will it pay for an optical sorter in today's market? Maybe not today, but it's an investment that we made because we think it will in the future. Just as you spoke at the beginning about it becoming, it's the number one packaging item, over HDP, even polypropylene, which surprised the heck out of me, but I believe it. You see it, and it's vast. So that's what kind of keeps us moving forward. We've always tried to operate that way. And I think when there's opportunities, like when we worked with the Recycling Partnership to receive a grant dollars for that, it was a great opportunity to invest in things like an optical sorter to do that, to learn from it. And I guess the other thing I would mention, if we can have that good, clean product to someone like Nicole, we're going to end up getting paid more. And then you kind of keep continuing you learn from there. When a buyer sees your product has low contamination rates, they're going to take you over others that have 40% contamination. Like that you can only get away with for so long before it just doesn't make sense anymore.
Yeah. So to go now, Rob, I'm going to go to you for a second, but first, Bryce, you make a bale, you want somebody to pay you for it. You were just noting, 5-10 years ago, you got maybe nothing for the bale or something, but you need Nicole to pay you for that bale, right? And Nicole, you make a product and you need somebody to buy that product, right? This is basic economics. These are supply chains, essentially. Bryce is creating feedstock for a supply chain. And, just to ground us, and we all know this because we're deep in it, the pricing that you get for polypropylene can be volatile too, because fundamentally, recycled polypropylene is competing with virgin polypropylene costs. So Rob, can you talk a little bit, because you guys are making the packaging, how you all think about recycled content versus virgin content, and those like, how does that all play out in terms of polypropylene recycling and the economics?
Yeah, so that gets back to one of the challenges we discussed earlier, is there's really not a lot of food grade recycled polypropylene available, whereas most of what we're making is food grade. So we're able to use some, for example, in non-food contact closures, and non-food contact, say, jars. But we're ultimately fairly limited. But we're motivated to offer our customers recycled content where we can and come up with innovative solutions. This doesn't pertain to the US, but in the United Kingdom, we actually have a recycling plant that's sorting the white and clear polypropylene, and then ultimately taking that and making a recycled pellet that does have an FDA non-objection letter. And so, we're doing a lot, but we have to, work within the constraints and supply demand economics.
So Nicole, how do the supply and demand economics, how do you all think about that? How does that impact you? Like, we're seeing virgin production increase right now. How is that playing out in terms of where you sit in the supply chain?
Well, for me, one of the key things that over the last 7-8 years when I've been working on this legislation, and we in Oregon are still not there to this point, but I think we will have to have a PCR mandate within packaging for this pull-through demand to work. And just like polyethylene, we now have 2 separate programs where polyethylene milk jugs are collected and then other colored are collected at a MRF. Polypropylene, I guarantee you, if we have the right incentives, we could absolutely do that in the bales and do FDA versus non-FDA, but there's no incentive when you have virgin dumping on markets and there's no mandate to use recycled content, mainly post-consumer.
And you're speaking to that, Nicole, because I mean, let's going back to when we were talking about how this all works, right? Like we've got to collect it from the resident. Bryce has got to sort it to a certain quality. You've got to sort it if it's going to go into a food grade application, right, Rob? So like a butter tub or a yogurt container. It's really essentially we need to make sure that it meets the FDA requirements around that, which is further quality control and sorting. That all has cost associated with it. So as you add up all that cost, the price of that pellet as compared to virgin is going to be higher. And we need the economic incentives for the people that are buying packaging from you, Rob, to pay more for the recycled content than the virgin. Essentially, is Nicole, what, like it's very hard for recycled content to compete with virgin content. Would you all agree with that statement?
I would agree, but I've also seen this polyethylene milk jugs, whereas at times it costs more than virgin, but people will still buy it because it is hard to pull out. So I don't think long-term that would be an issue if we decided to go down that path, just because we have had kind of the market within polyethylene and we've seen it works. But we all know that we'd have to have going back to PCR mandates in order for that to work.
Okay. So Rob,
And if I could just quickly,
Yeah,
double
jump in
click on
there.
that, Kate, you and I have discussed this before, but especially with EPR, which is really a supply side regulation, we fully expect EPR to increase the supply of recycled plastics and other recycled materials, not just plastics. And we need to once again lift up the demand to meet that supply. Otherwise, we could risk crashing markets. And so in a situation where, people often talk about fossil fuel incentives, and I'm not going to say we should or shouldn't take those away. The economy kind of runs on the price of oil. So I think, to exactly as we were saying, to ensure that people buy recycled plastic, even when it is more expensive, the recycled content mandate does that. It ensures that there is always a demand and you don't have these, peaks and troughs.
Yeah, it's very hard for Bryce at the MRF level or Nicole for you at the reclaimer level to get if you need investment or capital to continue to develop, it's very hard to get that when pricing for your end product is highly volatile. It's very challenging. And so what is the role of a PCR mandate or something we've been thinking about and exploring, or a tax credit for PCR? Like, what's the role of public policy that can incentivize the demand for recycled content and help stabilize that so that you can get the investment into the system for it to continue to grow? But it's a challenge. And so I'll stop there. Bryce, was there anything you wanted to jump in on there?
It's like peeling back an onion. There's a lot of layers there. So I had a ton going through my head, coming from all three of us on this call get pinched from both sides. My other side is taking directly from a consumer that puts waste at their curb, that wants it to disappear, and they want it to be as cheap as possible. So then when we get the recycling items and we have all this high-tech technology to sort them out, our buyers are like, we need this. It needs to look exactly like this. It's a huge challenge, and either people make it or they don't. And so I think we talked about the key is, from me, is communication with our public, and serving over 25 counties. That can be difficult. We utilize a lot of pictures in order to tell people this is what we want, rather than focusing on the numbers. I think Nicole was talking about that earlier, how a number on the bottom of a container can be not really what it is. So we utilize pictures, and has seemed to help a lot. But we're in a state in Iowa where EPR probably isn't going to happen anytime soon, if I had to guess. But people here are still passionate about doing what we think is right and recycling what we can, as long as it's financially responsible. So it's out there. We just got to continue to communicate and work together to improve.
I think you just highlighted something really important, Bryce, and I'm going to link it, Rob, to what you and Nicole were all saying, but we've seen extended producer responsibility pass, which is really a mechanism to fund the education, the collection, and the initial sorting of the material, and get people to put that stuff in the cart, right? Like we know at the recycling partnership that, you know, participation in recycling programs can be, you know, we're only capturing 20-30% of the material. There's still a lot that's going in the trash can, and we need to, how do we incentivize and educate residents to get that into the cart, right, in the first place? And EPR is a mechanism to do that. Bryce, to your point, oftentimes, you know, the way that recycling programs have been funded in this country is through residential municipal programs that go into property tax dollars, essentially. That's what's helped fund the collection of it. So EPR is bringing a new source of revenue. Can we bolster education to get better, good quality material? Can we? So that side, I just want to highlight there, Rob, you're noting, and I think Nicole as well, that gets at the front end of the system, but we may need to still incentivize the back end of the system with other complementary policy. For example, EPR may not solve the whole equation, or it may only get us, you know, so far. Nicole, I'm going to point this question to you. We've seen some news stories over the last year or so of like, polypropylene doesn't actually get recycled on the West Coast. It's going to landfill, etc. Like, what's your counter to that? What would be your, like, what role are you all playing in getting polypropylene recycled on the West Coast?
Great question. Well, I mean, first of all, I mentioned in the beginning specifically what our company is trying to do with legislation and being active in that, but it's more than just that. We, over the years, when you mentioned National Sword happened, we started getting more actively involved with the public and our community. And we have been for about 8 years now working with a local company, James Recycling, in the Portland metro area that does depot collections. And I've done that because I wanted to educate myself and talk to people, the residents, about what they thought about recycling. We also helped Lane County when they went down to a very small collection. We helped develop basically a collection that's a community collection with drop-off points that really flourished. And that will go away with the new recycling laws. But really, I feel like we have to listen to the community, the residents, and show them that recycling is real. And so we've also been trying to just get the word out and have opened our doors to tours and talk to people, much more active of a role within our community. So people see that, yes, it's work, but recycling is real, it's happening. And many times people will send us a note and say, are you really sure that you're recycling? Are you greenwashing? I'm like, no, we're making products. And so I think just getting that word out is super important.
What's the, Nicole, to that point, you know, and I think that was it, that's in part, well, I saw a news story several years ago that all those bales were going over to China and getting burned. And so you're trying to show, no, it's staying here in the United States. It's getting turned into a new product. Like, and what are some of those new products that it's getting turned into?
So one thing that we do, we had all been talking earlier about food packaging. A lot of what we do does not go into food packaging. So think of any utility type product that doesn't need FDA standards. Like for example, we do a lot of hospital waste in this area, but it doesn't go back into products made in hospitals. We have a lot of durable goods. I'm trying to work on, when we talk about PCR mandates, I would love to be able to have, you know, states that purchase materials like pipe or sheets or other things that are used in construction around the state. Those types of things are where those products can go. And we've seen a lot of growth in construction with using different recycled materials. So that's kind of where our space has been with our materials. It's not going back into food grade packaging necessarily, it's going into other items.
And those folks that are making those other items, why are they interested in using recycled content?
Well, in the beginning, we've been doing this for 40 years here. In the beginning, absolutely was price driven. It was always a delta of a cheaper material. And our background was post-industrial. Now that we got very involved in post-consumer and post-commercial over the last 4 to 5 years, we have definitely seen a change in how people view, in general, polypropylene, all the steps we've taken to be able to recover it, and those items that are going into it. Now they want recycled because they have sustainability goals. A lot of times customers are asking about it, residents are asking about it, and it's helped drive that change.
Have you seen, Nicole, people using recycled content plastic in terms of substituting for other types of material that aren't plastic in some of those in some of their products? Is that part of it too?
Yes, and especially when you're talking about construction, for us, at least from my experience. We always say that we like to reverse engineer a product. So we have people come in with something that might be made from metal, and they'll come in and show us the product, and we go back and they want to make it into a recycled material, plastic, and we will reverse engineer it. So that absolutely, over the last 10 years, has been a total change in what we've seen. And speaking of overseas, the other thing that we have done as a company is, when I was first involved with this almost 30 years ago, we'd have about 35% going overseas, but now we don't. Nothing goes overseas because we have chosen to keep it at least, in North America.
What made you do that? Was it?
Well, part of it was what happened when people were following the material. I didn't like what was happening to plastic going overseas. And I think a lot of people saw that the conditions there are poor. We really don't know what happens once it leaves our port. And I had traveled over and met a lot of our suppliers back then. So I knew where our material was going, but the world's changed. And I really believe in regional recycling within a certain reach. Not only for collection, that's how we built our company, but also for distribution and our customer base. The majority is within a certain radius.
I think, Nicole, you highlight something really interesting there. And Rob, I'd love your perspective. But with the passage of EPR, what we've seen in many of the EPR bills that passed in the United States, which is kind of a new concept, is this concept of a responsible end market, which is a reaction to, I want to know that my material is going to a market that is handling this material responsibly, just both in terms of how they handle the material, labor practices, environmental practices, et cetera, but it's a new concept. Rob, which is really essentially the first time to think about how we have traceability or even chain of custody in the recycling system. Rob, how do you think about that in terms of where you sit in the supply chain?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the concept of responsible in market is a good concept and the right concept. But since it is a new concept that we haven't necessarily had, especially in legislation, folks are really struggling with how to truly define that and, confirm that an end market is a responsible end market. And so I think that, quite frankly, initially, well, I'll just say over time, I think the bar is going to raise on what is a responsible end market. So I think initially we are going to look at, okay, here's these base criteria, making sure it's, material recycling, turn into another good. And then over time, it'll be more of a closed loop and ensuring those various, labor and environmental standards. But yeah, it's definitely going to evolve over time. And just since we're in the early phase of it, it admittedly is tricky for everyone I talk to.
Bryce, I'm going to pick on you for a second. I know we only have a few minutes left, but you noted earlier you're in a state that probably isn't going to pass EPR anytime soon. But how do some of these things that we're talking about, where Nicole's in Oregon and we're talking about responsible in-market requirements there, how do you think about what's happening in the states that have passed EPR and how that might impact you that's in a state that may not get there in the next couple of years?
Oh, I hope, I guess, and I could see how it could work, that EPR could help with just the volatility in market pricing. A lot of our challenges come around, we don't know if a ton of recycling is going to be worth $40 or if it's going to be worth $190. Trying to build an economic model, sustained, at least from us, we sustain ourselves off of markets and tipping fees, not off the tax dollars. It's difficult, and you talked about the margins being extremely low. So there are plenty of privates involved in it, but especially with privates and for public entities, you have to be able to pay for these things. So if EPR can help at least level that volatility of value out a little bit, I think it would be it'd be great for places like us. Then we know how to price it back to our communities and to the people that are actually putting on the curb and what they pay, and they wouldn't see giant increases in waste or recycling. So I hope that's what happens, and surprisingly in Iowa, not necessarily in recycling, there is talk in EPR for batteries, and this communication and talk is just coming up. So I'm interested to see what happens, and we're involved, but it will take us a little bit longer.
So that's interesting, I appreciate you highlighting that, Bryce. The concept of the person that makes the item is responsible for the end of its life is not just related to packaging. We've seen that in other materials as well. And I think it's a really interesting moment to start to have the conversation around how do we see our waste as a resource actually that goes back, that's feedstock to go back into the supply chain. I'm hearing more and more people talk about how do we build domestic resilient supply chains, whether we're talking about electronics or packaging or batteries, et cetera. It's a really interesting moment. But still, Nicole, I think you speak to this, Rob, you too, as well. Like some of these are pretty nascent supply chains or early stage supply chains in terms of kind of growing, looking at additional applications, and we definitely need public policy, both EPR, but probably some other complementary policies to EPR to really stimulate the growth of those supply chains and decrease that volatility. So with that said, each of you, do you have like a last word you want to share with folks as we think about polypropylene recycling? It can be a repeat of something you already said, but Nicole, I'll pick on you first.
I'll start. Just mentioning once again, I keep pushing that PCR mandates is really important to create a viable end market. And as Rob pointed out earlier about responsible end markets, we just went through a field test to understand what that means, because with Oregon's like the pioneers of all of EPR in the US right now, because they're the first ones to implement as of July 1st. And there's a lot of lessons that we're going to be learning. And I think other states that come on board will absolutely get some kind of good knowledge and information on how to make it work in their state.
Rob, any last word?
Yeah, I would just say I've been working on polypropylene recycling for over a decade. Since 2009, and at that time there wasn't a single curbside recycling program for polypropylene. And then now 77% of the U.S. population, and this is according to the Recycling Partnership data, as I'm sure you know, from the National Recycling Access Database, 77% of the U.S. population has access to recycled polypropylene bottles. 64% have access to recycled polypropylene tubs, 58% for cups, 57% lids, 49% trays. And so one, I'm very excited about the progress. And then two, just getting back to the diversity of applications, I really encourage everyone to be thoughtful in their education and ensure that all these items, if you're recycling one polypropylene item, you may as well, get them all to a certain extent, obviously food versus non-food, but be thoughtful in that education to ensure that we are capturing as much of that broad polypropylene stream that we can.
Yeah, and you all have been a key partner in investing in the ability through the recycling partnership to increase that access, to do that education and outreach, et cetera. So I can tell.
Yes, also shout out to TRP's Polypropylene Recycling Coalition.
I was about to go, I can see my colleagues saying, so Elise, I think we have 1 minute and there's probably a slide you want to pop up on there.
Yeah. I
Brittany-
think we missed Bryce though. Bryce, you got one more thing to say?
Well, I'll keep it real short so we can get past this minute. I think the biggest key to being successful in all of us and everything we touch is just being real with each other. And what's recyclable is recyclable. What's not is not. Let's figure out why the not is not and make it better.
I love ending on that. Elisa, I think there's probably a slide you want to pop up that gives a QR code to kind of learn how to learn more about the Polypropylene Coalition that we have at the Recycling Partnership that Rob mentioned, and how folks can join that Polypropylene Coalition to further grow the recycling of polypropylene. Am I missing anything else, Elise?
Nope. Thank you all for your time today. I really appreciate it.
All right.
You and all the speakers for a really great dialogue.
Yes. Thank you, Nicole and Rob and Bryce. I really appreciate it.